Yo, hello everyone, it's me Anjali. Now I will continue reading this book, The House at Riverton, part 7. The title is In the West. 1914 slipped towards 1915, and with each passing day when any chance that the war would end by Christmas. A gunshot in faraway land had sent tremors across the plains of Europe, and the sleeping giants of centuries-old record had awoken. Mayor Hartford was recalled to service, dusted off along with other heroes of long-forgotten campaigns, while Lord Ashbury moved into his London flat and joined the Bloomsbury Home Guard. Mr. Frederick, unfit for armed service on account of a bout of pneumonia in the winter of 1910, swapped motor cars for warplanes and was issued a special government badge announcing his valuable contribution to a vital war industry. "It was cold comfort," said Nancy, who knew about such things, it having always been a dream of Mr. Frederick to serve with the military. History tells that as 1915 unraveled, the war's true characters began to emerge. But history is a faithless teller, for while in France young men battled fear and dreamed of, at Riverton 1915 passed much as 1914 had before it. We were aware, of course, that the Western Front had reached a settlement. Mr. Hamilton kept us well fed with his zealous recitations of the newspaper grisly fare, and certainly there were enough minor inconveniences to keep folks shaking their heads and tut-tutting about the war. But these were tempered by the tremendous flurry of purpose the conflict gave those for whom daily life had become state. Lady Violet joined and formed countless committees, from the locating of suitable billets for suitable Belgian refugees to the organizing of motor car excursions for convalescing officers. All across between young women and some of the younger boys too, they bid for national defense, taking up knitting needles against a sea of troubles, producing a deluge of scarves and socks for the boys at the front. Fanny, unable to knit but anxious to impress Mr. Frederick with her patriotism, threw herself into the coordination of such enterprises, organizing for knitted goods to be boxes and mailed to France. Even Lady Clementine showed a rare community spirit, belating one of Lady Violet's sanctioned Belgians, an elderly lady with poor English but fine enough manners to mask the fact, whom Lady Clementine proceeded to probe for all the most ghastly details of the invasion. As December approached, Lady Jemima, Fanny, and the Hartford children were summoned to Riverton, where Lady Violet was determined to celebrate a traditional Christmas season. Fanny would have preferred to stay in London, far more exciting, but was unable to refuse the summons of a woman whose son she hoped to marry. Never mind that the son himself was firmly stationed elsewhere and firmly set against her. She had little choice but to steel herself to long winter weeks in rural Essex. She managed to look bored as only the very young can, and spent the time moving herself from room to room, striking pretty pose on the off chance Mr. Frederick should make an unscheduled return home. Jemima suffered by comparison, seemingly plumper and plainer than the year before. There was, however, one arena in which she outshone her counterpart. She was not only married but married to her hero. Meanwhile, upstairs for Hannah and Emmeline time was breaking. They had already been at Riverton a fortnight, and with ghastly weather forcing them indoors and no listen to distract them. They were running out of things to do. They played every game they knew, Cat's Cradle, Jacks, Gold Manor, which as far as I could figure required one to scratch a spot on the other's arm until blood or breathe them one out. They helped Mr. Townsend with the Christmas baking until they were ill from pilfered pastry stuff, and they caused Nanny Brown to unlocking the attic storeroom so they could climb amongst dusty, forgotten treasures. But it was the game they longed to play, and for that they needed David not due from Eton for another week. One evening, when the household had all retired to bed, the staff gathered by the ragging servants' hall fire. Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Townsend formed bookends either side, while Nancy, Katy, and I huddled between on dining chairs, squinting in the flickering firelight at the scarfs we were dutifully knitting. A cold wind lashed against the window panes, and insurgents, grouchers set Mr. Townsend's jars of dry goods to quivering on the kitchen shelf. Mr. Hamilton shook his head and cast aside the Times. He removed his glasses and rubbed at his eyes. More bad news. Mrs. Townsend looked up from the Christmas menu she was planning, cheeks red from the fire. The words, Mrs. Townsend. He returned his glasses to the bridge of his nose. More losses at ye white press. He rose from his hat and moved to the sideboard where he had spread out of a map of Europe, host to a score of miniature military figures. He removed the Duke of Wellington from a point in France and replaced him with 2 German hussars. I don't like this at all, he said to himself. Mrs. Townsend sighed. And I don't like this at all. She tapped her pen on the menu. How am I supposed to prepare Christmas dinner for the family with no butter or tea or even turkey to speak of? No turkey, Mrs. Townsend. Katy escaped. Not so much as a wing. But whatever will you serve? Mr. Townsend shook her head. Don't go getting in a flap now. I dare say I manage my girl. I will do, don't I? Yes, Mrs. Townsend, said Katy gravely. I must say you do. Mrs. Townsend peered down her nose, satisfied herself there was no irony intended, and returned her attention to the menu. I was trying to concentrate on my knitting, but when I dropped the third stitch in as many rows, I cast it aside, frustrated, and stood up. Something had been bothering me all evening, something I had witnessed in the village that I didn't rightly understand. I straightened my apron and approached Mr. Hamilton, who, it seems to me, knew just about everything. Mr. Hamilton? I said tentatively. He turned towards me, peered over his glass, the Duke of Wellington still pinned between 2 long, tapered fingertips. What is it, Chris? I glanced back to where the other sat, engaged in animated discussions. Well, girl, Mr. Hamilton said. Cat got your tongue? I cleared my throat. No, Mr. Hamilton, I said. It's just, I wanted to ask you about something. Yeah, something I saw in the village today. Yes, he said. Speak up, my girl. I glanced towards the door. Where is Alfred, Mr. Hamilton? He frowned. Upstairs, serving sherry. Why? What's Alfred got to do with all this? It's just, I saw Alfred today in the village. Yes, Mr. Hamilton said. He was running an errand for me. I know, Mr. Hamilton. I saw him at Mick Waiter's, and I saw when he came out of the store. I pressed my lips together. Some uncountable routines made me loath to speak the rest. He was given a white feather, Mr. Hamilton. A white feather? Mr. Hamilton's eye widened and the Duke of Wellington was released unceremoniously onto the table. I know that remembering Alfred's shift in manner, the way he'd been stopped in his jaunty tracks, had stood thus, feather in hand, as passers-by slow to whisper knowingly at one another, had dropped his gaze and hurried away, shoulder bent and head low. A white feather? To my changing, Mr. Hamilton said this loudly enough to draw the attention of the others. What's that, Mr. Hamilton? Mrs. Thompson peered over her glasses. He brushed a hand down his cheek and across his lips, shook his head in disbelief. Alfred was given a white feather. No! Mrs. Thompson gasped, plump hand leaping to her chest. Like that. He never was. Not a white feather. Not our Alfred. No, our Alfred. How do you know? Nancy said. Grace saw it happen. Mr. Hamilton said. This morning in this village. I knew it, my heart beginning to race with the uneasy sense of having opened the Pandora's box of someone else's secret, being unable now to close it. It's preposterous, Mr. Hamilton said, straightening his waistcoat. He returned to his seat and hooked his spectacles over his ears. Alfred is not a coward. He's serving the war effort every day. He helps keep this household running. He has an important position with an important family. But it's not the same as fighting, it is, Mr. Hamilton, said Katy. It most certainly is, blustered Mr. Hamilton. There is a rule for each of us in this war. Katy, even you, it's our duty to preserve the ways of this fine country of ours so that when the soldiers return victorious, the society they remember will be waiting for them. So, even when I'm washing pots, I'm helping the war effort? Said Katy in wonderment. Not the way you wash them, Mr. Thompson said. Yes, Katy, Mr. Hamilton said. By keeping up with your duties and by knitting your scarves, you're doing your bit. He should glance at Nancy and me. We all are. It doesn't seem enough, if you ask me, Nancy said, her head bowed. What's that, Nancy? Mr. Hamilton said. Nancy stopped knitting and laid her bony hand in her lap. Well, she said coldly, take Alfred, for example. He's a young man and fit man. Surely he'd be of better use helping the other boys what are over there in France. Anyone can pour, Sherry. Anyone can pour. Mr. Hamilton felt, you of all people should know that domestic service is a skill to which not all should suit Nancy. Nancy flushed. Of course, Mr. Hamilton, I never meant to suggest otherwise. She fidgeted with the marbles of her knuckles. I suppose I've just been feeling a bit useless myself of late. Mr. Hamilton was about to denounce such feeling when all of a sudden Alfred came clattering down the stairs and into the room. Mr. Hamilton's mouth dropped shut and we fell into a conspiracy of collective silence. Alfred, Mr. Thompson said at last, whatever's the matter, rising down the stairs like that, she cares about and found me. You scared poor Grace half to death. Poor girl nearly jumped out of her skin. I smiled weakly at Alfred, for I hadn't been friend and all.